Hey guys, so happy you could join us for another session with Rich and Mike. Guys, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, bud.
And we're talking about 7 fatal marriage mistakes. And maybe most guys don't even know that they are making them. So, quick rundown before we get into them. We are looking, first of all, at sleeping around to gain experience. Number two, marrying a woman just for her looks. Complaining to your wife, not taking ownership, seeking validation, not having a purpose, and quitting. So you know what you're in for, and we will welcome any questions on these as we go through. I think these are some of the most common mistakes that people fall into, and I don't know how many you need to make a real mess of your marriage, but I would guess like 3 of these 7 long term, you're going to be in for some serious difficulty. So let's kick off with number one then. It's a really common misconception today that a real man has to sleep around, preferably as much as possible before he gets married, because then he can go into that marriage with plenty of experience and it's going to benefit him somehow. Now, guys, one of the things I love about you two is that you're very open about your lives before you were saved, before you converted to Catholicism in Rich's case. And then Mike, you're not Catholic, but you were raised Catholic, fell away from the faith. Now you're back Protestant. So Christ found you as well. We need to hear a bit more about this because you guys have got some experience of living exactly how you've been told to live by the degenerate red pill culture saying sleep around as much as possible. So, Mike, tell me a bit about this. Why shouldn't men do it?
Well, there's nothing to be gained and everything to lose with that lifestyle. I'm sure Rich can attest to this as well. The intimacy that I enjoy with my wife now, I can tell you with absolute conviction, I don't draw to any of my previous experience. The fulfilled intimacy I experience with her has evolved as our marriage has grown. It is fulfilled. It's enjoyable. It's pleasurable beyond all recognition, beyond something that I can even communicate properly. Whereas, when I was a single man trying to quote unquote gain that experience, it was very performative. It was very like a sport, but way worse than that. See, this is the thing the trap that I fell into was that in the red pill manosphere, they talk about how, okay, so masturbating to porn is bad. So having sex with women is better. Actually, I think it's worse because not only are you sinning against yourself, your body, and God, you're dragging somebody else into sin as well, right? Um, it didn't serve me in any which way. So when I go to, make love to my wife, I'm not thinking, oh yeah, I did this thing with this girl. But it did harm me in a dramatic and traumatic way because it almost completely ripped me away from my wife the first time we started dating. So, to all the men out there, I think I want to really reverse the mindset here where a lot of men out there are feeling, especially a lot of the men that I work with, they have quote unquote low notch counts or they're virgins and they feel ashamed of it. Dude, that's a gift. Dude, that's a blessing. Do not feel ashamed of it because there is absolutely zero to be gained from having a high notch count. And there's nothing to be gained from sexual experience because you don't bring that into marriage. I actually don't really have much of a memory from that life really anymore at all because I just don't really think about it. And I think there's also this lie of sexual chemistry where you have to test out sexual chemistry with a woman before. That's a load of bollocks as well, because if you get a 18 or 19-year-old virgin and 18 or 19-year-old virgin male and female in the same room together and they're married, they're going to know what to do and it's going to evolve over time. It's not like you got to practice. It's not like the gym. You don't got to get your reps in. You got to grow with one person. And in fact, that's a way more fulfilling situation to be with that person and have it grow over time. So that's the short story long.
Yeah, well put. And if these guys want to take it to the realm of just like hard science, biology studies, and not talk about religion whatsoever, there's been research done on women being brought to orgasm better by virgins they're attracted to compared to guys who have slept around a lot that they're not attracted to. So that's just a proof of Mike's point there that it's not necessarily going to be anything you can bring with you to that woman that you get married to. So remember that. You can get a virgin who sexually pleasures a woman better than a man who's been sleeping around trying to improve his game in the bedroom for 10, 15 years, but she's just not into him. So if you're sitting there with Ideally, you're a virgin, saving yourself for marriage. That's not going to disadvantage you whatsoever. And Mike's making the point here that you're actually pulling someone else into sin. Now, here's a oops upside your head point for everybody. If you are a guy who's a careless driver and you maybe crash the car, maybe you total it and you injure yourself and the girl you're driving around, that is still not as bad as you putting yourself and her into sin through fornication, because that's a spiritual injury to both of you, which is far more grave than a physical injury. Yeah. So talk about being a protector of women. That means you don't make yourself an occasion of sin for them, which is what you're trying to do, luring them into that lifestyle. One thing I want to pick up on there is that Mike said that it's actually worse than masturbating for that reason. But this whole idea of just using someone else's body to basically masturbate with just for selfish pleasure, guys don't realize that that's what hookup culture is. Rich, say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Mike, what you said was spot on. I was thinking about this question kind of before we went live, and actually the whole series of questions. And I'll just make a couple comments and then pass the torch back over. Um, you know, St. Thomas defines effeminacy as a reluctance to suffer due to an attachment or a pleasure, right? So all these seven things, it's all an attachment and it's all a pleasure, every single one of them. And the first one being, sleeping around to quote unquote get experience, like it's BS. And I'll start with firstly is, what came to mind in a spiritual sense now as a married man, that, you know, in a spiritual sense, every single encounter that you have kind of like is with you for life. Like it tears at your edges, like a specter, like a haunting, and that, I mean, you could be Catholic, you could be Protestant, you could not believe in anything. And like, it's still gonna be in your edges, like in that forest place. You have a cleared field, but those specters are right there in that forest in your marriage, and that's something you don't want. Or if you're already doing it, like, hey, you probably should limit that. The second thing is, I think what you said, Mike, too, is spot on. In our culture, sex is treated as a game and a sport, right? It's like almost like in that pickup culture. It's like, what can I do? Like it's a sport. It's like, hey, how can we can do this and use somebody else, and then and in turn be used your own self. And then I think number three is we're in uncharted territory right now because this has never happened before. Never in the history of mankind has there been the pill and contraceptives and ready abortion, and kind of commercialized sex all together at the same exact time. Like this is brand spanking new. Like where, and it's not looking good by the numbers. Like the numbers don't lie, and it's a pitfall, and it's weak to do all of these things. Carrying baggage, both you and I mean your wife too might be carrying, heavy bags from living and being sold into this kind of lifestyle, like a consumer. And I think last, like I was thinking about how to correct it. And what popped into my mind was kind of like honor your lineage, like your family line, like what you're going to create with you and your wife, and honor your parents and the past generations. Like, you know be strong, and keep it keep it where it's supposed to be. And have some honor with having your passions under control.
Yeah, importance of honor, I think, is often overlooked here. But it takes a strong man to have his passions under control. And a weak man is going to be easily swayed by them, like a little feather that's blown around in the wind. Oh, I feel an impulse of lust there. I better act on it. Or I haven't got the self control to be able to make it another week without watching porn or masturbating or whatever. So strength and chastity go together. And we got the fact that Rich was talking about specters there haunting the clearing of your marriage, and you've got the woodland right at the perimeter of it. Now, when you're married, you're having to practice the habit of chastity still, not celibacy, because the whole point of marriage is sex, procreation, raising children, but chastity still, which is rightly ordered sexual desire. What do you think is going to happen to you, to your wife, to your marriage if you've spent the decade before or so ingraining in yourself vices that are opposed to that? You're not a guy who has trained the muscles, so to speak, of being able to discipline them. And then you flip the switch and then you get married and somehow everything's okay. That's not how the human habits work. This is vice and it's a bad pattern of behavior. We can't change things overnight like that. So that's a big misconception. Do you guys want to say anything about that before we move to number two? So build the habits you want before you get married. So you're building on a strong foundation.
I couldn't agree more with that, Will, because I think a lot of guys, even guys in the faith, come into marriage with deep pornographic addictions. And so even within the container of marriage, although, dude, make love as much as you want, but if you're committing sinful acts like sodomy because you have this weird fetish because you've watched far too much pornography, well, then now you're descending into sexual sin within the confines of your marriage. So it would behoove most men to get these things under control. Dude, like, I quit porn a very long time ago. And the same thing for masturbation a very long time ago. And it's like, I don't care what the science says about cleaning the pipes or what have you. Your body takes care of that by itself. And I've made very many posts about saving all of my sexual energy for my wife. And what does that result in? It results in a very normal, healthy, and loving, intimate life with my wife. I don't need bizarre things to get me to climax. All I need is my wife and in the confines of our bedroom, and that's it. That's pretty much it. So it absolutely would behoove most men, get these things under control, man, because you're going to be bringing your sin right into your marriage, and it kind of defeats the purpose of it in a way.
Yeah, well put. And apart from the woman out earning the man, which is the leading factor in divorce, we can talk more about that later. Porn is another huge factor as well, and it's related to impotency too. So the more you use it and you get those kind of sexual leaks that Mike's talking about there, the worse it is, and the more likely you're going to end up impotent, unable to have that relationship with your wife in the first place. So porn definitely needs to go. Rich, any final thoughts on this one before we move on?
Yeah, I think treating your wife as an object, that's where it becomes very detrimental to the marriage, right? Viewing your wife as like an object for your sexual gratification. And that's why you need to get everything else under control and get your libido under control. And it's more masculine to have a control over that than either doing things that you shouldn't be doing, or kind of pressuring her, or being weird, or doing stuff outside of the box that you should be within the confines of the marriage. And I think that's the big takeaway there.
Yeah, correct. And you can make the case, and there are Catholic writers who made this case forcefully, that sexual sins within the marriage are an even graver offense against God than sins outside it. So Elizabeth Anscombe, one of the top 20th century philosophers, she has a great essay on contraception and chastity, and she makes the point that for Catholic moral theology, the contraception within a marriage is even worse than outside. So it's interesting to think about what Rich is saying there, using your wife as some kind of toy. And that is one of the things that really rots the sexual relationship at the core. So when you hear about guys trying to combine, like, let's watch a little bit of porn and then we can make love together, that's so disrespectful and dishonoring your wife. Think how that must make her feel. But it's common. It's common now to have people using porn as a stimulus, watching it together and trying to make it part of the marriage. But it's just like an infection right at the heart of the home. So no wonder it ends in problems like sexlessness in the marriage, because the guy's watching something that's likely to make him impotent and less attracted to his wife in the first place, because he's numbing himself to that proper sensitivity to what is sacred about the act. All right, number two, controversial one, marrying a woman just for her looks. I see this a lot. So guys will be thinking, yeah, okay, she's virtuous and she's looking for a husband. She wants to start a family, but I was kind of hoping for more like a 9 out of 10, and she's like a 7 out of 10. I'm going to keep my options open. So if you're making a decision for a wife based solely on looks. What do you guys think of this idea? Mike, let's start with you.
Well, I think there would be a lot more fulfilled and happy marriages and a lot less men getting divorced. Putting them, cultivating their masculinity aside for a second, because that's a huge piece to it. If they stopped thinking with their little heads, if they just kept their peepees in their pants, it would just lead to a lot better judgment and maintenance of your rational faculties, right? Because I can speak for myself, and I'm sure Rich can as well. I've made concessions for women in the past where I would have never made those concessions before in regards to their worldviews, whatever beliefs that they have, the fact that they're absolutely not mother or wife material. But I constructed this false idea in my head because I was addicted to the sex. And that was all very much intertwined with the way that they looked. So I think, again, it would really behoove most men, keep it in your pants. Even I would say to go as far as saying uh, affection before marriage too can really cloud a man's judgment. And that's probably a controversial one because we're like, hey, what do you mean we can't touch each other? It's like, well, it just comes down to the restraint argument. Men just do not have restraint. I absolutely think it's a poor judgment call to marry a woman solely based off her looks. If I was single, at least with the worldview that I possess now, if there was a woman that's a 9 or 10 out of 10 with questionable morals, questionable ethics, and a woman that was a 7 out of 10, but she was marriage and mother material, there is no question I would take the marriage and mother material. Period.
Yeah, let me just reiterate that. So Mike's saying that 7 out of 10 looks, so a reasonable level of attraction between him and the woman, but she's virtuous, she's good wife material, good mother material. He's going to go for that as a man with discernment over the 10 out of 10 Instagram baddie who's going to be just a mess of a woman and not be able to have a good moral foundation with him. Because, look, marriage is for procreation ultimately, and that's going to very much change the amount of time that woman's got to try and beautify herself with all these elaborate routines, and it's going to be a strain on the relationship too. It's self-sacrifice in a marriage. The ugly side of someone, that makeup, plastic surgery, whatever else it might be, can put a veneer over. That's soon going to get exposed when you hit the reality of the road of marriage together, and you want to get that virtue, that inner beauty, which is something you can actually rely on and is going to sustain you both. Otherwise, you're in for a nasty surprise, and that's what happens to so many men. Rich, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I like this question a lot as well. Marrying for looks. My wife is very beautiful. I will say that, and I probably married for attractiveness. So I'd say really four keys, right? When kind of both saying like high, it's important. It's not the most important thing. So one, attractiveness, maybe, and these are out of order, right? We'll say attractiveness, say shared values, right? So your values are in line with each other, like, and that's kind of goes to that like virtue and everything that falls in there. I'd say another very, very important key is the same religion, even if you're not practicing, marry within the same religion. So for those guys that are like, hey, I'm Catholic, but I don't go to mass, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. Like, you don't know what's going to happen between you and your wife, like in the upcoming in the years. So I would say marry within the same religion as well, because things change and things evolve as well. And then also family, like where's she coming from, where are you coming from, meet the family and know the family too, because that'll be a good indication of how um, your parents are getting along, and she gets to see that, or you're seeing how her parents get along and their interactions in their marriage, because you have to think that was her first view of marriage. That example is the first thing that a child sees within a marriage. You want to take that very seriously, of like, all right, family, religion, shared values, and attractiveness would probably be the best order of that situation. But that's what I would think about when I would recommend somebody to say, hey, are they fitting these criterias?
Yeah, that's a smart way to put it. And look, guys, Rich is saying there, like his wife's beautiful. All three of us got really beautiful wives. We're not saying don't marry a beautiful woman. We're saying that you need to bear in mind that there are other factors to consider that might outweigh a woman who is really stunning, but is not going to make a good wife for you. if you choose really well, you're going to get everything, the whole package, have great chemistry between you and all the rest of it. And that's possible to do so even now. Don't listen to the doom and gloomers who say there's no good women left. You can make this happen for yourself. It just takes a bit of courage. But Rich makes the point there that you need to have the shared values, like the glue that's going to bring you together. Because why are you getting married in the first place? For kids and for raising them. And that means you need to have the same direction you're going in, the same kind of purpose. What's behind that union? And the phrase that some of the older priests used to use was that a mixed marriage begins with a spiritual divorce. Think about that. A mixed marriage begins with a spiritual divorce. So let's say you're a Christian and you meet a really hot atheist girl. You're starting with a spiritual divorce, and you might convert her, you might not. She might hate everything you tried to raise your children to believe, but you were led astray by the fact that you were thinking with your little head, like Mike says. So, mixed marriage begins with a spiritual divorce. You've got to get the foundation straight before you go anywhere else. So, we've been talking about a couple of points so far about basically finding the right woman and then taking those first steps in marriage. And it's like when you're aiming a gun or you're aiming a bow and arrow. If you get the aim a little bit off, the angle's just slightly wrong. By the time it's traveled 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, you're going to miss the target by miles. And it's the same thing with setting up your marriage. Your aim needs to be square. Virtue comes from archery metaphors. In all the different ancient languages, guys are talking about virtue as archery, and the virtuous man hits the bullseye. And he does that with his priorities for choosing a wife as well. Then he can build his marriage well. The guy who has got his eyes blinded by lust is not going to manage this. All right. Now, let's say a guy's followed our advice and he's married and life's difficult. Yeah. We live in a fallen world. We're fallen creatures. You're going to have to put up with your own shortcomings and your wife's shortcomings as well. And you need to be able to support each other through this. What is bad about complaining to your wife constantly? She's going to irritate you, and things are going to irritate you apart from her as well. Your job, maybe it's your boss, maybe work's not going how you want, maybe you've had a bad workout, maybe your elbow hurts. What's wrong with complaining to your wife about these things? Mike?
It's an effeminate trait. Let's just start there. I think there's a place where you could bring an issue to your wife or a problem that you want to talk about, but the way that I like to frame it, and I'm not always bang on correct or perfect about this, is I already have a solution in mind, and that's communicated as well. It's like I'm just talking this out loud. She's my helpmate. I want to kind of discuss this thing, but there's already a solution. I'm not coming at it with this catty, like emotional, like, drivel and groveling over something. There's nothing masculine about that. There's nothing virtuous about that. And to be quite honest, like, she doesn't want to hear that. She's dealing with her own myriad of emotions in her own mind. She doesn't want to sit here and listen to her man endlessly talk about how much of a jerk his boss is. I think that should be saved for a man's friends. Just keep that out of your household, dude. Like I said, it's not to say you can't talk about problems in your life. Like, I'm like, sometimes I'll come to my wife and say, my hip hurts or whatever, but that's just how it goes. And that's where the conversation pretty much ends. I'm not sitting there and becoming emotional or stewing in my sadness and my self-pity about something. I do believe this is one of the biggest things that leads to the loss of attraction from a woman to a man.
Ooh, that's a great point. So why is it unattractive for a woman? Why is it that a woman seeing a man complain like that? Why does it make her find him unattractive? Say a bit more about this, Rich. Mike's got a great point there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's displaying for her right in front of her your weakness, and that you are almost like unreliable. You can't handle this thing, whatever it might be, a boss issue, job issue, taking care of something. Like, you're complaining and you're doing it in front of her, to her, displaying your effeminacy, your weakness of not wanting to do something that's hard, when you should just, shut up and carry that burden, whatever it is. Hey, you had a bad day with your boss, whatever. Somebody who's, gave you road rage on the road, just walk through it. Just walk right through it and have control of your emotions. Like that means complaining too. Be in control of your emotions, your urges, like your passions, your gluttony, like just facilitate control over your body. And it makes she's just going to see you as weak, as not, if it came to the time that you needed to take care of something, she's going to hear that complaining and say, he's not going to take care of the needs that I need met. Thus, he is less attractive.
Yeah, I'll tell you something cool. So, testosterone levels are inversely correlated with tearfulness. So, if you're a guy who's crying all the time, it's probably a sign you should get your testosterone levels checked because they might be too low. And what we're thinking about here, if we take it back to just like basic caveman level, when the situation gets dangerous or tough, or maybe it gets dark and you're under attack by animals, whatever it might be, the woman seeing a man just like break down and cry about it and complaining that there are all these threats, that's not attracted to her. She doesn't feel safe and protected. And it's the same way, I'm sorry to say, when it's not a saber-toothed tiger, when it's just the daily grind as well. And this is the kind of environment where the woman is not going to be able to relax into her femininity and to be submissive and receptive and think, okay, this guy's got it handled. I feel safe getting pregnant and being with him raising kids. It's just like, this guy is about to snap. What's going to happen if one more thing irritates him? Is he going to have a breakdown? Is he going to lose his job? Is he not going to provide for us, etc., etc.? So when Rich says that it's a display of weakness, even if the woman might be supportive, and a good wife is probably going to pat you on the back and say like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear you're having these troubles," she's going to be registering it still as weakness because it makes her concerned. So that's a great point. We don't want to signal weakness because someone has to step in and then take up that slack. And this is why so many guys have feminist marriages, basically, because they are inviting the woman to step into the leadership role that they've vacated by abdicating that kind of authority, basically. They're no longer trusted. Okay, we're going to move on to the fourth one now, which is not taking ownership. So, complaining is one thing, but not taking ownership and responsibility for when things go wrong, maybe even worse, just blaming your wife for it. A man should accept responsibility for the things that happen in his family. So, as far as possible, it's your fault. That's the principle I want to talk about here. Mike.
Absolutely. I talk a lot about this on my Instagram page, is that a cornerstone of manhood, especially virtuous biblical manhood, is shouldering responsibilities that sometimes we don't feel we should be shouldering and doing it anyways. Who else are we to blame? Are we to blame God as the only being above us? I'm not going to blame my wife. I certainly haven't been always perfect in this regard, but I think there's remnants of this red pill thing that I think that has infected a lot of marriages. Is men have a hard time saying sorry. That somehow that signals weakness, and taking that ownership is above them. I think that's, you're emasculating yourself by not taking ownership. Like you're essentially like a prepubescent teenager. You're like, well, it's not my problem, it's your problem, and you're pointing the finger. Well, when you're pointing a finger, there's more fingers pointing back at you. And so when I look in the mirror, I'm a pretty self-aware guy. I know when I'm passing the buck of responsibility to somebody else, and that doesn't register right in my spirit. And with that, it's harder to take ownership, but I think it's way harder to deal with the fact that you feel weak as a result, because there's that little gnawing voice in the back of every man's head when he knows he's deflecting responsibility and not taking accountability. And he knows, I think even the least self-aware men out there, he knows in the back of his mind he's being weak. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a difficult one for people to accept, isn't it? That we know that we make all kinds of mistakes and we're inclined to weakness of the will and also intellectual mistakes too. This is what original sin means. But it can be stronger to just acknowledge fault. You've made a mistake. And it's a kind of defensive weakness to pretend that you never make mistakes. So the truly strong man isn't afraid to acknowledge and accept where he's gone wrong. He doesn't have to put up a facade. Rich, any words on this?
I love this question as well. And, thinking about owning all of it and then what you just said about the garden, right? So you have Adam and Eve, and immediately God says, questions Adam, and he points right at Eve. So he sinned more and he passed that buck, he passed that responsibility. So with this, I'd say, own all of it. As the head, you're required to do so. Those decisions, the support, you can provide, education, the care. And number one, I think, what a leader does take, he has to take on all of the failure, right? And the failure means when you're taking on that failure, you're taking on the corrective action or the bearing of the burden that failure created, even if it's not your failure, right? So you have to take it on no matter what, because it's kind of in your realm, right? It's in your farmland, it's in your kingdom, like that belongs to you. And number two, so you get to take all of it on if it's a failure, and figure it out and carry that burden or correct it, or a combination of both. And secondly is, the successes, right? That I think is another key place. The successes, those are all shared, right? You're sharing every bit of it. So if you're going out on that hunt, like, you're bringing it all back before you've eaten. You have to bring it back. You're going to share all your successes with them and give credit when credit needs to be given, even if that credit shouldn't be fully given over. It's a win for the family. It's a win for the wife. It's a win for your children. So also taking that and sharing all those successes is the second part, because you got to take the burdens, but the successes you got to share. And guess who eats last? You do.
Yeah, well put. And everything good about you, including your life itself, comes from God. It's all a gift. So there's no point being possessive and clingy with it. That's the sharing point. And what we're trying to do as leaders of families is use the natural authority under natural law that men have as the leaders of that society for the benefit of everyone to try to get them to heaven. And you're going to be held accountable for yourself, your wife, and for your kids as well when God's asking you what you've done with that authority within your family. So we have to bear that in mind. When something goes wrong in a sports team, you look to the captain, like, what's the play here? Why don't people know what they're doing? Why is this team in such a mess? Who's in charge? Captain. Same with family, you look to the father. We've got a few questions that we need to pause on here. A couple of just comments. Bear your cross, never complain, never stop working for your family. Look after your family first, and then everything else will flow. Yeah, I like that. I would just say get right with God first. Otherwise, your family life is not going to be right. But that's the right kind of ethos. And a mistake people make here is putting their job above the family, like career over family, colleagues over family. Keep the job in its proper place, which is just something to provide for your family. And then your real job, your true vocation, starts after work when you get home. That's where a man's most important duties are. Easy to forget that, isn't it, Mike? I find it easy to forget that.
Oh man, that's the whole reason why I moved my family cities, and so my wife could be closer to her family, and where because I was working way too much, the balance was totally skewed. I wasn't being present. Where now I'm just around a lot more. And to be completely fair, I still struggle with this from time to time. As you know, Will and Rich, being business owners, you're kind of always thinking about the next move. So really being grounded and present and intentional is of the utmost importance, but can also be the biggest challenge that we face day to day as husbands and fathers. But men do hard things. So I just know to myself, I have to dial myself in and be as present as possible, because what does, an abundance of money serve you if your family, if your sons, your daughters, your wife, they didn't have a present man in the home?
Yeah, right.
There's no amount of riches. $3 million cannot replace the dad that was intentional that makes 30K a year.
Yeah.
Period. I think there's more negative impact from the man that makes, let's say, millions of dollars a year, but wasn't present at all, wasn't, emotionally stable, wasn't intentional, versus the man that maybe didn't provide in the biggest financial way, but was there in every other sense, prayed over meals, was the high priest of the home and prayed with the family, got them to church on Sundays, was active in all those activities, that man is going to leave a way greater legacy. It just may not be financial. I could not agree more.
Yeah, he's a better provider than the beta billionaire who's never around, because the number one thing you're supposed to provide is that education in virtue and a good example. If you don't provide those things, then what are you really doing? Just stacking up figures in a bank account, and your kids never really get a connection with you. This is no joke. If you listen to Father Ripperger's material on his work as an exorcist, he talks about one of the main tactics that demons use being to take that good impulse that men have to bring material security to their families and blow it out of proportion and turn it back on them as a weapon against them and against their families, and turn work into an idol. So you got to be careful that you keep your desires ordered and don't let them become disordered. That's why the Bible describes the love of money, not money itself, but the love of money, as the root of all evil. That's what's going to pull men into this web of sin and get them enmeshed, and very hard for them to get right in other areas of their life. Rich, comment on this before we move on. So we're just thinking about what your priorities should be.
Yeah, I think what both of you said is spot on, and I think too. I just wrote in my notes as you were speaking, Mike. It's basically an inversion, right? It's taking the good of money or job or providing for your family, and you just invert it and you make an idol out of it. And I think that's what the devil does, right? With everything, like you could say that for. I was making a point to my daughter the other day. You could do that. Is going to church good? Yes. Is if I started going to church every single day and not, taking care of you guys, would that be good? No. It ends up changing it. Like Father Ripperger would say, you have those holy rollers, and I'm not saying some of them are like, maybe a few of them are like that here and there, but maybe they're not taking care of the business at home, which is ultimately what God wants is you to be present with your family, your wife and your children, and leading that family, leading the prayers in the evening, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what he said, spot on. The devil always makes an aversion over everything and inverts good, and don't make an idol out of your job. Provide for your family up until a point. And
Yeah.
then if it's taken away, then you got to fix something.
Yep, exactly. Super important to stress that inversion point as well, because what goes wrong in Eden is that man wants to be like as God, but without God. That's what the original seduction was, and the taking of the forbidden fruit. And then we got the inversion of the hierarchy of man and woman as well, where the woman becomes the leader and then teaches man. And that's the inversion of hierarchy within marriage, too. So we've got to bear those two big things in mind. For people who just joined us, we're just talking about 7 fatal marriage mistakes. We've covered sleeping around to get experience, bad idea. We've covered marrying a woman just for her looks, bad idea as well. Complaining to your wife and how it's a sign of weakness, and it's going to ultimately make her find you really unattractive, because no one wants to be married to a complaining little boy. And then not taking ownership as well. We use the analogy of the father being the leader of the family, like a captain is of the sports team. If the team's not playing well, the captain's not doing his job. Same with the father. And we're just pausing for a few questions before we get to our final 3, which are going to be seeking validation from your wife, not having a purpose, and then quitting when things get tough. So a few more questions. We've got interesting one here. Not really about wives necessarily, but let's get to it. How do you build a group of strong men around you when most of your classmates, workout partners, etc., are all into degeneracy? I've been struggling with this. I've got a few thoughts about it, but Mike, you take this one first.
A couple things come to mind. I think find a church that you connect with that has a masculine pastor that keeps the teachings in the word and is biblically accurate. That's, for me, the first thing. There's going to be men's groups that are in there. I would say get involved in those. A direct experience that I've had is moving to this new city. It's been, I have friends now, but getting involved into a brotherhood of men that have a similar mindset has been difficult. So my good friend Brendan runs the Instagram page Masculine Revival, and he's got a brotherhood group that's very Christian centric. And it's been one of the best decisions I've made since moving here. And in general, getting involved with those men, and we meet, every week, and we connect all throughout the week. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in person. You can seek these things out online. I think the internet has brought more bad overall, if you look at it, but there are some bits and pieces that are really good. And that's like, for example, this seeking of brotherhood. Look online, look to people that have, of course, look to men that have similar viewpoints as far as, of course, your religious affiliation, and make sure that they are not effeminate, because that'll eventually creep into your personality and your day-to-day life as well.
Yeah, we have to be really careful here, because the reality of fallen human nature is like that proverb where one bad apple. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, and you guys probably remember from being at school as well. You can have the class clown, the one kid who doesn't want to be there, wants to mess around, and then he will impact the others. It takes one bad kid to ruin a classroom. If the teacher's weak and can't keep control, it takes one bad kid. That's it. Every teacher knows this. When that kid's not there, it's like a different class. It's easy to manage. But you get that one kid in, you got to be on top of it the whole time. Now, this is because human nature naturally inclines towards disorder. We got to fight against this tendency. Virtue is hard work. So if you allow yourself to just hang out with people who are pulling you in that direction, that's like pouring bad apples into the fruit bowl, and you're the one left. And before long, you're going to be the bad one too. So take it seriously. Mike's advice is good. In real life, I think it's great. And the ideal for me would be something like 10 guys within 10 miles who have got your back. You can support each other. Ideally, you're going to have different skills in life as well, different tradesmen, etc., different fields of knowledge. So you can make like a little band of brothers there to help yourselves out, do jobs for each other, trade ideas and skills. But that's hard to do nowadays. So online can help to fill the gap. Rich, what are your thoughts on this? How can you get a good circle of friends?
Yeah. So how do you build a strong group of men when most of your peers, your classmates, and workout partners are degenerates? I'd say, number one is, you're not going to walk away from the gym, right? So keep working out with them, right? They might poison you, but if you're rock solid, like where you are, you're only going to be an influence on them. So if your faith is strong and you're not a degenerate, they'll start asking questions. Like, guys are naturally, when they see somebody doing well and excelling, and their spiritual life is under control, and they're weightlifting and they're strong, they naturally get very curious. And they'll start with like, what kind of supplements you taking, man? What are you doing? How do you lift? What time you wake up? They ask like crazy questions. How much water you drink? I get weird questions sometimes, but I say, listen, they're working out and like being kind of like a gym rat, so to speak. Like I've been in the gym a lot for 23 years now. And so, it's also part of like that weird gym culture, right? Work out with them, be a good example, be an influence on them, keep lifting, and then have your spiritual life on the other plane, right? So meet those folks at men's groups through church. There's so many of those things, like, St. Joseph's men's group. And, if you have a solid parish by you, or even if you don't, like, go out of your way and find a solid parish by you and inquire, like, you'll see other guys around that are not degenerates. You'll know them because if you're showing up on Sunday at the same 9 a.m. mass, you'll see those same guys and just be like, hey man, hey, I was thinking about starting a men's group. What do you guys think? Maybe we go 8 o'clock at night, grab a couple beers, talk whatever, talk Aquinas, talk marriage, whatever you want to do. But I say, keep working out, be an influence on them, lifting. That's also part of it. And then find that men's group and connect with it.
Yeah, good advice. I've got a few degenerate friends still from when I was a kid, and I'm not leaving them anytime soon, but I'm just careful about what I do with them when we spend time together. And one of them the other day even said, like, I want to start reading the Bible. Where should I start reading the Bible? And I was thinking, good for you. Start here. So, yeah, don't give up on these people, but you got to treat them with caution. Okay, so next thing we have a question about, where was it here? Yeah, personality connections. So amidst my dreams has found attractive women with strong trad Catholic values, morals, shared beliefs. However, once you actually spend time with them, what we're seeing is that, for one reason or another, our personalities don't seem to click. How much of a factor is this when discerning a wife? So, personalities clicking. You've got aligned values, and yet you just don't seem to get on. What would you guys do in this situation? Mike?
Oh, that's hard to say because when I met my wife, our beliefs aligned and our personalities clicked. So that's a difficult one because you have to spend thousands and thousands of hours with this woman. So if it's not clicking right off the get go or after a few dates, I would say I firmly believe God placed our discernment and the feelings of the spirit in our stomach a lot of times, and our stomach, the brain in our stomachs tells us a lot. So if there's something that's not aligning, and through prayer and discernment, God's wisdom has told you, yeah, this is probably not going to work out. We have aligned beliefs, but we just don't click in these ways. It's best to probably move on, say, hey, listen, no insult to you. It just doesn't seem like, we click. And I would just find somebody else, maybe not intentionally. I'm not a fan of like trying to actively seek out a partner. Yeah, I'm kind of torn on that necessarily, but I don't think it's a good idea to try to make something fit if it doesn't fit. Because if I didn't actually like what my wife said, and if our personalities didn't click, I don't think we would make it this far, especially through some of the turbulent periods in our marriage that we've been through. So I would just move on in this case.
Rich?
Yeah, I would just say I would need more info on this kind of type of question. I think it's complicated, right? Because you don't know if it's one time or 5 times. You don't know. I would say meet her family too, meet her friends. How does she act around family? How does she act to friends? Because that really, you start to get to know somebody a little bit better, and maybe those walls will come down. Because on the other end too, you have to think, maybe she's nervous, right? Maybe that's a factor too. I would say, hey, go meet her family, meet her friends, see, because you don't know, if you sometimes you break bread with somebody and they open up, things change, right? Things change in a big way. So I wouldn't say, if they're checking a lot of boxes in other categories and it's a good match, maybe take a couple more steps just to make sure you crossed all those bridges, to understand fully before you say, oh man, I made a mistake, because then no one wants to do that.
Yeah, if during your courtship, and I think people should get engaged within 12 months max, none of this stringing it out for 4 or 5 years, ridiculous nonsense, a year tops. You're going to know if you're constantly falling into like really deep, bitter arguments with someone. That's probably a bad sign, even if you do have the same religion, etc. But if it's just that you have the occasional disagreement, again, that comes back to the fact that this is part of fallen human nature. You're going to grate on each other a bit. And don't delude yourself into thinking you're going to be able to marry someone that's never going to happen with, because it will. Even with the most perfect match for you, psychologically, spiritually, all the rest of it, you're still going to be married to someone who is affected by original sin, as are you. So there will be disorder there you have to fight against. And don't hold out for some perfection when the reality is what you're experiencing now might be about as good as it gets. But if you really feel there's no click in there, ask yourself, do you tend to click with people generally? Like, are you just a guy who's difficult to get along with? Some people are like this, and you have to have that in the back of your mind as well. It might be that you are the problem, not her, and you need to adapt because you found someone who is so good in every other way. Like, when I do the psychometric tests, I come out as like 99.9th percentile disagreeability. I'm just really stubborn and disagreeable. And then that's part of who I am. Yeah. And I need someone who is a bit like that as well, to like give me something to like push against. Otherwise, everyone around me is just a complete pushover. So I need someone who most people would find a little bit difficult to get along with. So I joke that like my wife can outlift most guys in the gym, and her personality wise as well. She will, if it's an argument with another guy, not her husband, she's got no reason to submit to him. She'll quite happily shoot people down. That works well for me, but for another guy, that might not be the kind of thing they can handle in their marriage. But for me, it's fine. So you got to know yourself well. All right, more questions come in and then we will get to them. But let's get to our next three things. Seeking validation. Hey, hey, look at me, wife. Aren't I so great? Give me a gold star. I earned some money today, or I changed the light bulb. I took the bins out. Give me a pat on the back. Praise me the whole time. What is wrong with this, Mike?
Uh, you're supposed to do those things. So why are you looking for the pat on the back? Now, listen, like encouragement from your wife is huge. We all can attest to this when our wife, encourages us. But what's special about it is that it's unsolicited. It comes out of nowhere. It's not like I go to my wife, hey, look at what I've done. I'm going to get a little pat on the head. Or a lot of guys, what they do, and this is really bad beta simpy behavior, is doing these things just to get some sex. Is just gross male behavior because it's very transactional. Hey, listen, our love is supposed to be sacrificial, just like Christ's love toward the church and toward us. So why are we looking at this transactional deal here? Plus, I mean, talk about another factor in killing your wife's attraction to you. It's like you're like this little good boy looking for a pat on the head. No. First of all, like I said, our love is supposed to be sacrificial. You're supposed to do those things anyways. Why should you get a congratulations for helping her in the home or changing a light bulb or bringing home more money? That's our role anyways. And if you're doing it for sex or whatever, I think that's a symptom of a greater problem in your marriage. It's just gross, effeminate, and emasculating behavior.
Yeah, and it's the same kind of display of weakness that we talked about earlier with complaining, because if you're constantly seeking validation, then you're playing the happy wife, happy life game, and there's truth to that in that if you lead by following God and then creating a correct frame for your wife to like exist within, if you lead a happy life in that sense, then you're going to have a happy wife. But if you invert things like we are talking about earlier and make the happy wife the primary goal and then think your life's going to follow downstream from that, no, because no human being is supposed to be in that position in your life. And that will lead to like a wreckage of a marriage. You don't put your wife on the pedestal, which is one of the things that the red pill community do get half right. They're groping at some truths here psychologically about the way human beings relate to each other. Although we part ways with them in all kinds of ways, there's a grain of truth to some of what they're saying. Rich.
Yeah, seeking validation, and I would say the first thing that came to mind, Mike, same as you, gross. It's gross. And I'd say first, be comfortable alone, and that means you have to have your spiritual life under control, right? You don't need to have that validation. Like, be comfortable with who you are, have your spiritual life under control, be comfortable alone. Without that validation, like you have a duty and a job to do, be comfortable with that and have your spiritual life under control. I think the modern issue too, and guarantee in like 1920, like our great grandparents, like this didn't come up ever, probably never came up. The modern issue, I think, that we have in our culture in the West is everyone gets a trophy. So you have this like weird, like everyone gets a trophy, everyone gets a reward. I should be praised for, just doing subpar stuff. And I think it's a sick mindset of the West. I would say do your duty. Begging for validation is gross. I was thinking about Beowulf, right? At the end of Beowulf, he's doing his duty. His duty, he's going to die. He's not asking for validation from his kingdom. He's going out and setting himself out and going into the lair of the dragon, knowing that this is it, knowing he has a strong hand and his sword will fail him. And he's an old man at that point. And then the other thing too is think about the example of Christ, right? Christ said many things, and he never asked Saint Peter, like, do you think I went too far with Pharisees? Do you think that was too much? Like, he never said that, right? He wasn't seeking validation from his comrades, Peter, of being one. No, he called them a brood of vipers, and he stood with no validation needed, like none whatsoever. So an example of like masculinity at Christ and Beowulf, and I mean, we can go on and on and on with books and examples. But I think, have that quiet strength, and you don't need that validation. And guess what? You'll get it. You'll get it in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, well put. It's about integrity as well and wholeness. So if you're constantly seeking validation like that, that's to do with insecurity and not having that strength to be alone in the first place, which is why Rich is saying that the spiritual life is what you need to get right to begin with. And then the material success and stability comes after that. Otherwise, you're just going to be an insecure, anxious basket case eventually, even if you have got a big bank account, because your foundation isn't actually firm. The husband, the father, is going to be the cornerstone of the family. And guess what being the cornerstone means? You take the most weight, and the cracks that you've got in yourself, if you're not asking for grace, they're going to get exposed. Doesn't matter how much you can lift, how strong you are physically, that cornerstone taking the weight of the moral responsibility and duty for the whole family, trying to lead them all to heaven, you need help to do this. So that's why your prayer life is really important. I really like the movement we're seeing on lots of social media platforms to try and get guys to understand what their basic natural law duties are as men, as fathers. But there's a kind of sleight of hand or cheap trick in this, I think, sometimes, because it's saying, like, here's the blueprint, guys. Here's what this like amazing high spec car looks like when it's tuned to perfection. But guess what it runs on? It runs on grace. It runs on prayer. You can know all about what it's supposed to do and how to drive it and where to get to, the destination, the roads, the pitfalls to avoid. But what are you going to put in the tank? Because it sure as hell better not just be you trying to fill your own tank up, because that's not going to take you very far. And that's a low performance fuel. You need high octane stuff and you need to ask for it daily. All right. It begins and ends with the man, Everett Overton says. Yeah, that's true. This case study that I'm working on now for guys stuck in sexless marriages, big mistake I see is blaming the woman, just like Adam did in Eden. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. No, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the fact that something's gone wrong earlier on. You're thinking it's the cause, it's the symptom. So you got to fix the man and then you fix the marriage. Okay, next question here. Not having a purpose. Not a question. Point number 6 on our list. Not having a purpose. Well, I kind of hinted at it there with the car analogy. Where are we driving this family? Where are you trying to get people to? Some guys never thought about this. One of the sentences that really hit me hard when I was in my early 20s was T.S. Eliot in an introduction to Pascal's Pensées, which is his thoughts about religion. I was reading that for university, and T.S. Eliot said, the average man, when he calls himself an unbeliever, is just cloaking a disinclination to think anything through to a conclusion. Like, you've never sat down and thought, what do my ideas really entail? If I pursue this to the maximum, what's my worldview? Most people never do it. They just stay on the surface, superficial. And when the man doesn't know where he's going, where he's leading the wife, how's he going to lead? Would you guys trust someone leading you who didn't have a clue where they were heading? Mike?
Yeah, great point. The only thing that's driven me in my 20s, honestly, even well before I met my wife, was I had a conversation with myself when I started my business when I was 22. And I said, if I have nothing by the time that I'm 30 and I'm unhealthy physically, spiritually, financially, that's my fault. And my whole purpose was to father a family and to be a husband. That was ingrained in me young. I didn't have a good relationship with my earthly father. Early on, we still don't have a relationship, but I knew my biggest driving force in my entire life was I got to be the dad that I never had, because that's the only way to repair my lineage. That's the only way to repair my bloodline. That's why I kept my last name and didn't change it to my mother's maiden name. That was one of those big aha moments when I came to Christ. Was like, why am I trying to change my last name? I have an opportunity to be a new link in an old chain here. So ask yourself, do you want to be a father? Do you want to be a husband? Now, the roadmap to getting to that point, physically, financially, spiritually, we know. It's Christ. Physically, we know it's getting into the gym. Now, financially, only you can answer that question, whether it's a business or entrepreneurship inside the company that you already work for. But your why and your purpose has got to be bigger than just the Bugattis and the baddies, because that's nothing. Because I came to a point of some modest financial success in my mid 20s, and I kind of destroyed myself with it in a way. Because I was like, okay, I'm going to do all the flashy stuff. And what it amounted to was absolutely nothing. And now, just kind of like that seeking validation point, I kind of get this really deep feeling of gratification when I'm bringing more business in, when I'm able to provide for my family, not just financially, but also spiritually, and being there where I don't have to seek that from my wife. I feel that gratification from God myself. So I just think it, not to meander about it, but your why has got to be way bigger than just you and sort of the pursuit of your flesh passions. For me, it was fatherhood and being a husband. That's ultimately all it was.
Yeah, for sure. And the potential for fatherhood is what manhood really means. The potential for fatherhood is the essence of manhood. And you will find out what kind of man you are when you're tested like that. And what are you going to teach your kids? For me, that was the big question too. What am I going to teach my kids? What do I fundamentally believe? And if you are a guy whose intellectual development stops at some like red pill platitudes, that's it. That's what you're going to tell your kids about the world. You haven't thought any deeper than that. That's pretty pitiful. And then the point Mike's making there about early 20s financial success. Look at how many celebrities die at age 27. It's a thing. Look up 27. You're old enough to have made a bit of money. You're old enough to have some success, but you're too dumb to actually know what to do with it. And you can destroy yourself. So you need to have a kind of anchor that explains to you what you need to do with this, what your purpose is. Rich.
Yeah, I think the purpose is spot on. It's religion. Have your spiritual life correct. Have your religious life correct. Your put in the hours, put in the reading, go to mass, go to confession. Get that under control, and where properly ordered, as in the direction of the altar. So proper order there, because you want the building blocks first, and then husband, and then father. So that kind of father is the almost like the completion, not almost, it is the completion of the marriage, right? And then you get to see each other within the marriage in your ideal roles, right? You get to see your wife as in the role of mother. She gets to see you as in the role of husband and father and provider and spiritual head. It's really the basics have never gone away. These are the same principles that have been for every civilization that's ever been successful. Is religion, husband, father. That's your role. That's it.
For sure. One of the ideas that got me sacked in my lecture at Eton College was that there's never been a matriarchy anywhere at any point in human history. It's just patriarchy universally, everywhere you look. And that's because human nature never changes. Young guys watching this now, write this down. What's true isn't new, and what's new isn't true. You've got these basic fundamentals that Rich is pointing out here. Success leaves clues, and you don't have to figure this out for yourself. That's the whole point in time tested traditions. People know what works, doesn't mean it's easy, but it's both simple and hard. And that's what the test of manhood involves. All right, last point, number 7, quitting. Quitting. And I just want to start actually with a comment here. I'm going to read it in a silly voice. Why would any sane man sign a contract with a woman when she holds the balance of power backed by the state? Modern marriage is financial suicide. Now, this is quitting before you even begin. Yep. This kind of guy deserves to lose his civilization. This is marriage avoidance, just like in Falling Rome. You're broken before you even begin because you're scared to get married. Why are you scared? Well, it looks like money here, financial suicide, right? But the stats show that even divorced men are still wealthier than never married men because marriage itself boosts earning power by around 15 to 25%, most studies show. And you're taking your life more seriously. You have greater purpose. You're the kind of guy who actually takes on challenges rather than sits at home with whatever that is, limitless life. You're limiting yourself with your own beliefs there before you even get into this. So money is the main reason it looks like there why you won't get married. Well, we know if you get married and get divorced, you're likely to be wealthier than if you never get married. So by your own logic, get married if money's what you care about. Even if you get divorced, you got more of it. But I don't think that's really it. What is at the heart of this, Rich, do you think? I see it in so many men today. They don't even want to try. This is like feminism's last laugh. They've got men out of the family so well. Exactly what they wanted to happen, that they won't even try.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about this situation and limitless life, if you're listening right now, is you're here listening to a talk about marriage and avoiding pitfalls in marriage and making it work. So I would just say, hey, listen to what we have to say. Look at the church and what the church has always taught, and start putting those into use. Because I mean, at the end of the day, if you marry for the points that I had brought up earlier, and looks being last, and you start taking care, and you father children, you get married, you have your spiritual life under control. This will be a very regrettable comment in 10 years. And I mean, I could have seen myself making a comment like this if I was like 18 years old. So I get it, but I mean, you are listening to this channel, and you're probably ingesting some of these tips, whether you want to or not, and they probably make sense to you. So start looking inside yourself and get right.
Mike, thoughts on this? Do you see it in the guys that you work with?
Oh, yeah, I have seen that, and it comes from this like just this angsty hatred of women when really it's an not wanting to look at themselves in the mirror and work on their own flaws, and just expecting a woman to be the submissive trad wife without them putting in any kind of effort, without them being virtuous, without them being accountable to God, expecting patriarchy without their own submission to God. I do see this quite often. My question to this guy is, what is the alternative? That we all are men going their own way and we all just opt out, and then what happens? Our civilization becomes extinct, just like you said. It's feminist last laugh. Assess yourself, repent for your own sins, look at your own flaws, and work on yourself, and realize this worldview you have of women is something that you have constructed yourself. Are there bad apples out there? Yes. And this is my whole point. If men just vetted women properly, if they didn't get them into the bedroom too quickly, they would be able to have their rational faculties about them so they could see the women in front of them as they are. And if enough men kept it in their pants, there would be more quality women because they'd follow our leadership anyways. And so the same kind of men that espouse this stuff, and I see this in the manosphere, I see this in the red pill all the time, men do hard things, but don't get married. Dude, everything that you do in your life is a risk. Everything that you do in your life is a risk. Investments, business, even working for a company nowadays is a risk. Everything that you do is a risk. You're going to risk not having the most fulfilling, beautiful thing, gift that God has given us is the family and marriage. Tell me, what is the alternative to that? And so I think this guy's got to take a hard look in the mirror, assess his own spirit, assess his own heart, because I sense a lot of pride. And I'm going to say this too, a couple of things. A lot of men like this are obsessed with finances and sex. Let me tell you, every year that I've been married, I make more money. And I have better sex, and my intimate life is far more fulfilling. And like I said, same thing for my finances after I got married to my wife. So keep it in your pants, vet the women that you're dating and you're courting, submit yourself to Christ. You're not going to have these problems. I see this as like this average frustrated chump kind of energy, which is really effeminate and emasculated. And I think this guy's just got to get out of his own head.
Yeah, I agree. You're limiting yourself before you begin. This is the mentality of a quitter. We know that the marriage and family battlefield is the most important battlefield for men to regain control of culture, because it's the one that feminists targeted most of all. It's the one that totalitarian regimes always target because they know how important it is. Satan, as well, in Eden, targeted the relations between the man and the woman and tries to stir up resentment between them. So, for a man to be like Adam did, blaming the woman and pointing the finger, you're taking feminism like within yourself. When I see these guys saying, oh, modern women this, modern women that, they're all beyond marrying now. There's no hope for me. That's just a black pill that is a form of cowardice. And you need to step onto the battlefield, even though there are some risks. None of us are idiots. We know what you're talking about here. We can look at the stats, but you can also marry a woman who doesn't believe in divorce. And you can see for yourself, like Mike's put it, that the rewards are so great that they massively outweigh the risks, because you're talking about the future of your civilization. You're also talking about being able to look into your kids' eyes and hear them laugh and have a lifetime of love with your wife. It's not possible. It is. Some people are doing it right now, lifelong, with submissive wives, with authority within their homes. It might sound like a fairy tale to you, but where there's a will, there's a way, and you can step up to this. No fault divorce laws is the big thing. It's not. You can just marry someone who doesn't believe in divorce, and that cuts both ways. A man, in principle, can initiate a divorce whenever he wants. And why are you scared about divorce anyway? You said it was the money, right? We know that you're likely to be wealthier after divorce than if you are never get married. So if money's the main thing, you can just knock that out straight away. Gone. Okay, let's talk about quitting more broadly. Quitting more broadly. We're not talking about quitting as in end of the marriage, we're divorced. We're talking about quitting as in there will be times within the marriage when it feels tough, or maybe particular projects that you're working on. And when I got married, the priest said, look, do you know why we say I will traditionally rather than I do? Why the marriage will is I will, not I do. Because it's about your willpower. It's about every day waking up saying that I've made a commitment to you and I'm going to make this work. That's why when you hear about people saying we fell out of love, what the hell are you talking about? You don't fall into it and fall out of it. This is a commitment of the will to the objective good of your spouse for the stability of your family and the benefit of your children. So tell me a bit about willpower within marriage, guys. Mike.
This is the thing about modern marriages. I just don't understand why people get married if they're not believers in God, in Christ. If you're just relying upon your sexual chemistry and your feelings of oxytocin and dopamine, that whole process, it's going to fail. The willpower for me that allows me the gasoline, that high octane gasoline you were talking about, Will, that allows me to endure, are the vows that I made to her, because I made them to God. This covenant is with God first. This container of marriage is something that he created. So no matter what, and I think the only biblical justifications for divorce are if one person falls out of the faith and turns their back away from the faith, and in the case of infidelity. So my wife and I agreed that unless there were these cases, and even then that's on a case-by-case basis, that's not to say that we would get divorced, is we made this commitment to God first. And I know as a human being that's in a fallen state, every single morning I have to say I do over and over and over again. It's kind of like the gym. It never really ever stops. You have to continue to show up, and you're going to have highs, you're going to have lows, but it's the discipline to keep doing that. And it's also the effort that you pour into the other person as well, right? Like this marriage requires work. Yes, it does. But I think the work is still courting your wife, praying with your wife, showing her affection, that you actually care. These things, again, are going to happen in ebbs and flows, but at the core of it and the foundation of it is the waking up every day and saying, God, I do. And to my wife, I do, and I will. That's super, super powerful, because that transcends all feelings that you have. It transcends any dopaminergic or pathway or anything, any amount of oxytocin that you feel, those fluttery feelings, because those things eventually fade. Eventually her skin is going to wrinkle, and what's left? It's the promises and the vows you made to her, under the eyes of God. And so that's what, to me, very, very, very early on, in frustration, I would take off my wedding ring. And then one day I woke up and I'm like, wait a second, I have to look at this symbolically. I'm never taking this thing off my finger like that in that anger, unless I'm just going to bed and I'm putting it on my bedside table ever again, because I'm slapping God right in the face.
This is why we like Mike, because he's honest. He says the thing that some guys wouldn't want to admit. Thanks for that, Mike. It's an important point to make. Rich, how about you?
Yeah, I think quitting for me, when I was like thinking about this question, obviously I know what you're talking about. Quitting is, whether shrugging off responsibility, right? Shrugging it off with God, marriage, wife. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about marriage. Marriage is it's a tough, long road, right? You have your ups and your downs, your vicissitudes within a marriage. Uh, so many things change within a marriage: job and children and sicknesses and crises everywhere, and also within the relationship of marriage. Like, your wife might drive you crazy for 9 months or 10 months or 14 months in a row. And I think that's the time where you need to put in that work and remember why you're married, right? Your duty, and you will be held accountable in a Christian marriage in the church, as getting your wife into heaven. Did you do that? When you have to go and answer before our Lord, you are going to be responsible for your children and your wife. Going to be asked a different set of questions. She's not going to be responsible in the same capacity that you are responsible for her. So I think about this sometimes, and you have to remember God also brought you together for your purification. And you have a chastisement that comes with that purification. So you need to embrace the chastisement, and have your prayer life set and your discipline set, because that's going to get you through those harder times. And who knows, at the end of the day, you might be the only one carrying everyone through those hard times. You don't know what they are, but you have to have the proper order first of God understanding your role as husband and father, and to get your wife into heaven, taking on that chastisement, not following up with anger. The second thing about quitting too is like, hey, knowing that chastisement and knowing that your duty is to get your wife into heaven, et cetera, and take on those burdens, is quitting those things that you need to quit when you're not taking on that chastisement. That means like your anger, your resentment, your whatever it might be, that you're putting upon her, that you should not be putting upon her. So that's what I would say about quitting. It's two components. It wakes you up to have the responsibility, don't quit your duty, and secondly, to quit the right things when they become eye-opening, available to you. But you have to have your prayer life right first, and you have to be married properly first.
Yeah, if you get slack on the foundations, which you've made really clear throughout the whole session today, Rich, get the spiritual life correct first. If you start taking shortcuts and quitting on those little things, then it's going to end up bleeding into your day-to-day life as well. I know this is something that we're going to talk about later on as well in future sessions, with the role that regularity and discipline, Twitter, people can find you, rigid discipline, the clues in the name. You've learned a lot of this the hard way, and I've got some good wisdom to share there. So, guys, it's been really great to talk to you today. And I just want to finish with this point here. She has no reason to leave if you're the man you're supposed to be. This is a good mindset to go in with, because people do make lifelong marriages work. Still, you can find a woman who doesn't believe in divorce. Still, you can get all these important things we've been talking about today done. Still, you don't have to sit at home and break yourself before you even begin by saying you're too scared to step onto what the ultimate battlefield for men really is. If you're concerned about degeneracy, the culture war, which is really a spiritual war, the devil wants you despairing before you even find out what you're capable of. Whereas the masculine message is step up, because you've got the ultimate power in your corner behind you if you actually call on him for help. But if you're trying to get on this battlefield just by your own power without that spiritual shield, then Yeah, it's pretty scary. But take courage and don't be afraid if you're doing it for the right reasons with the right backup. And that's what all three of us have found, and what so many other men who are refusing to sit down and cry about it and accept defeat before they even try and see what they're capable of have found as well. So, guys, where can people find out more about you? Rich, I mentioned your Twitter there, Richard Discipline. Mike, how about you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, just my name, Mike Pantile. I also have a website that just outlines, the coaching services that I offer. But for all the content, the virtuous masculinity content, you'll find me on Twitter and on Instagram.
Awesome. Rich, Twitter's the best place for you, yeah?
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay, cool. I'll put the links for both of you in the pinned comment so people can check those out. And then let's do this again, maybe next month. Been great to talk to you both. And thanks for people in the chat as well for the comments. Hope you've enjoyed it. There's a lot of value here. I wish I had heard it when I was 20. Would have been great for me. So if you stumbled across this, listen again, take some notes, share it with your friends. Thank you. Take care, guys.
God bless, guys.
God bless.
Take care.
See ya.